About the same time Jeff Cavins was making his decision to leave the Catholic Church, Scott Hahn, Marcus Grodi, and Larry and Joetta Lewis were following their hearts in the opposite direction, and they were discovering the very painful realities of the choices they were about to make. Scott Hahn attended one of the most conservative Protestant schools in the country. He had a deep passion for Christ and Scriptures. At the age of 26, he was asked to be the dean of a Protestant seminary. But like many of his...
was St. James in the Epistle of James, in James 2:24, where James says it is not by faith alone that a man is justified. You know, and that is why Luther called the Epistle of James an epistle of straw, because it contradicted what he was convinced was the gospel, the pure and simple gospel. Well, the more I began to understand that the God who justifies is a father, and that in justifying us, he is not just exonerating or acquitting criminals as a judge, but he is adopting, he is reconciling sons and daughters to himself through his eternal Son, I began to realize that justification couldn't possibly be by faith alone, because that isn't the way any family operates. You know, it isn't possible for a child simply to say to a parent, "Look, Dad, I believe you. That's enough. I don't have to obey. Now, out of the gratitude and the goodness of my heart, I will obey if I feel like it, but I don't have to obey in order to live as your child." Well, that sort of attitude is rebellion, and that is the opposite of faith. So the deeper I went into the writings of St. Paul, and the more I understood the covenantal background of Paul's thought, the more I realized that Luther got it wrong, badly wrong.
The early Protestants also taught what is called sola scriptura, that Scripture alone is the source of all authority in the Church. That tradition in the Church, and what has been passed along from the first apostles to the rest of the Church over the ensuing centuries, has no authoritative role.
And I discovered that nowhere does the Bible teach that the Scripture alone is our only authority. Instead, I found the Bible pointing to the living sacred tradition, as you find in 2 Thessalonians 2:15 and 2 Thessalonians 3:6. Paul says, "Hold fast to the traditions that you've received from us, either in writing or by word of mouth." So you have Scripture and oral tradition, and the Thessalonians were taught that they had to hold fast to both of them.
For Scott, the final issue which had to be answered was the role of the Pope. Who was this man, and did he really have the authority to be the shepherd leader of 1 billion Catholics around the world? He found his answer in Scripture, when Jesus handpicks Simon Peter to be the first pope of his church. It happens in the 16th chapter of Matthew, when Jesus gives Peter the keys of the kingdom.
Every Protestant and Catholic commentator who explains those verses knows darn well that Jesus is quoting from Isaiah 22, verse 22, where the son of David, King Hezekiah, entrusts to one of his royal ministers the keys of the kingdom, so that everybody in the realm might know that this man, Eliakim, is not just a royal minister anymore. He is the prime minister, because he has the keys of the kingdom. So before this, Peter was one of the 12 apostles, one of the royal ministers. But once Jesus entrusted to him the keys of the kingdom, that meant that Peter was the prime minister. And that was more than just a function, that was an office, as it had been in the Davidic kingdom for centuries. So here's Jesus as the son of David, establishing his kingdom through the 12 apostles. And he said to them in Matthew 19, "You'll sit on 12 thrones and rule the 12 tribes of Israel, but one of you won't just be royal minister, you will be the prime minister." And so I discovered in studying the Bible that not only was sola fide false, but sola scriptura was as well.